Kristen Tanner, Director of Marketing Communications here at Symmetry, and I will be hosting today's cybersecurity webinar. We really do appreciate you all taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for today's cybersecurity webinar, and hope that you walk away with a little bit more information about how to get your confidential and highly sensitive data a little bit better protected. We will be starting the webinar shortly, but I wanted to cover a few housekeeping notes. Only our presenters' phones are live. Your phones have been muted to block any background noise. Our presenters will be answering questions at the end of the webinar, but if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A on the sidebar of the webinar. If we don't get to your questions, we will be sure to answer them at the conclusion of the webinar. Now I would like to introduce today's cybersecurity presenters. Rick Berger is VP of Cybersecurity here at Symmetry Corporation. He leverages his extensive 20+ years of IT experience to spearhead Symmetry's industry-leading security and compliance teams. As a cybersecurity-focused IT professional, Rick provides strategic guidance in assessing current security footprints for our valued customers, as well as he oversees the ongoing managed services, security services, to meet and exceed customers' complex compliance needs. Our next presenter today is Jim Rozycki. He is a cybersecurity specialist from DELL SecureWorks, and we're so happy to have him joining today's joint presentation. Jim is a leading cybersecurity expert with over 20 years of experience in managed security services, security risk consulting, and global threat intelligence services. He prides himself in his ability to create and implement highly effective security programs and procedures to both short-term and long-term IT strategies, making customers both better protected and successful. Over the course of both Jim and Rick's careers, they became sought-after thought leaders and regularly share their industry knowledge. We are so happy to have them presenting today and are looking forward to a really great webinar. So without further intro, I want to kick it over to Rick, and he will get started. Thanks again.
Good afternoon, everybody. I know that you're extremely busy, as everyone is in IT, so I want to thank you for joining this seminar. Hopefully we're going to share some things that will get your thought process or give you ideas that you can show with your own C-level folks, as well as the actual people in the trenches fighting the bad guys, for lack of a better term. Some of the things that we're going to cover today is why Symmetry and why DELL SecureWorks. There's a lot of players out there. We all know it. Cybersecurity is going to grow incredibly, so why us? What does the organization consider risk? The evolving threat landscape, investigate of current cybersecurity breaches, most pervasive malware trends by industry, the threats to your business health, some of the best practices when you do work with third parties, and basically why we partnered with SecureWorks. So the reason that clients tend to choose Symmetry is because of our people. Symmetry has extensive experience with SAP, for example, although we don't do only SAP. But those of you that are familiar with SAP know that it is a very strict environment. When SAP doesn't work, it can shut down entire factories, insurance companies, etc., because of its integration. So we're very focused when it comes to the customer and their experience. We are what you would call, in my opinion, a tailored type house. So we listen to what the needs are per client. And as you have different personalities, from auditors to different parts of the United States and the world, we listen and will mold the requirements to your needs. And of course, we partner with SecureWorks so that you have 24/7, 365 eyes on glass on some of the security things that we offer. And Jim, feel free to talk about DELL SecureWorks.
I appreciate it, Rick. Thank you. And again, everyone, thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us this afternoon. Why do clients choose DELL SecureWorks? Well, we are the world's leader in the managed security service provider space. We've been in business for about 17 years. Dell bought us about 5 years ago, hence the DELL SecureWorks moniker. But we are truly a global company. With our managed security services, we have well over 4,500 clients in about 70 countries worldwide. We have 5 security operations centers. that are all staffed by experienced security analysts 24/7, 365. And just the breadth of the information that we see close to 110 billion events daily that really kind of helps provide, you know, our research team, which we call our counter threat unit, that vastness of information about the threat landscape to really bring this to task. And in addition to that, you know, as Rick mentioned about Symmetry, there's a lot of different things that this organization does, and that's why SecureWorks is, you know, partnered with Symmetry. Between both organizations, there's a lot of value from a security perspective, as well as some other network type perspectives that, you know, we jointly can bring to you. A little bit about, again, DELL SecureWorks and kind of where we stand in the industry. Kelly Kavanaugh is the main analyst at the Gartner organization, looking at security providers. And if you'll notice, DELL SecureWorks is way up at in that most favored position in that leaders quadrant compared to, you know, most of the others. And obviously, you know, we're very proud of, you know, this ranking, you know, by Gartner. And of course, you know, Gartner gets their information in speaking to industry insiders, customers, prospective customers. They really do their homework well, you know, not only in the security space, but also obviously in other aspects as well. And then in addition to that, the SC Magazine Awards, we're, you know, honored that, you know, we won it again as best, you know, managed security provider. But the interesting thing with this is, you know, this is an award that we're probably even more proud of because this is an award that comes from the users, the readers of the SC Magazine. You know, these are customers talking. These are, you know, people that actually utilize our services. So this is really, you know, kind of from the grassroots level.
And I'd like to add here, Jim, I've known SecureWorks since 1999, and in a former role with a global company that served many financial institutions, as well as being a consultant for law enforcement agencies, I was tasked with, as part of a committee with my former company, of who out there had the best cybersecurity posture. Now that's back in about 8-10 years ago. We did a very extensive grid of who the players were, and that was an ongoing thing. And over, from my personal opinion, SecureWorks was always up there. I dealt with them in a number of ways, and I usually recommended them at least some of their most popular services as a very good starting point. The other thing that I'd like to say about SC Magazine is similar to buying cars. You have those that drive cars and are experts, but their needs sometimes or their viewpoints aren't the same as you and I as a consumer. What I like about SC is, sure, we have Gartner, which is excellent, but I also, with SC, that's what you and I feel. That's what the actual customers that have to deal with security companies, that's their opinion, and that's very important to me. So the question I have for you and to think about is, what is your goal? How do you consider risk? You know, it's no longer, cybersecurity is no longer a part of the business, it's about the business, as we've seen and as we're going to discuss. So what are the primary goals that you would like out of your security program? Risk management, you know, mitigating risk, keeping that down, achieving compliance requirements. And those of you that are in the security industry know that you can be compliant and still not secure. Protecting your company assets, improving your security posture, and then there may be other goals that you have. Now, how do you achieve those? Well, some of them are achieved through policy and procedures, and of course you have scanning and testing programs, you have log monitoring identification, you have incident management and response, and then many other things. So it's very, very broad and numerous skills that are needed to protect assets. And then if you do have these, some of these or all of these, the next question is, how well do you do it today? And that is a very large part of what you're going to bring to the table to your organization when you advise them, or your organization and what they actually implement. So that's going to show how much at risk your business is, and indeed investors, and bottom line is each individual human's identity.
The other aspect to think about too is you kind of, talk about, what your goals are, as an organization and protecting your environment. But the other aspect of it is, like Rick mentioned, previous, security is no longer just an IT issue. It is truly a business issue. This is a discussion that needs to happen at the C-level, at the board of directors level. This isn't an IT manager's thing anymore. And if you look at the way the threat landscape is changing and evolving and morphing, it's really, in essence, it's a moving target. And the only way to really understand that moving target is to kind of take a look at some of the things that are happening out there. Employees, as a threat vector. I mean, most of us in IT, we can kind of chuckle and laugh a little bit when we all see the email that has the PDF attached that says, click this for your tracking information. Well, the employees do fall for that. Humans are the weak link. The black market for digital records is absolutely uncanny. Whether it's just names, address, phone numbers, but you start bringing in birth dates, you start bringing in other more confidential information, bank account numbers, credit cards, what have you. The list goes on, and that market is growing rapidly. Risk from partners and affiliates and suppliers, and we'll talk about some of the more common breaches, but we all know what happened to Target Corporation, the large retailer that ironically has a bullseye as a logo. But it was that small air conditioning, that little HVAC company that was the thing. So, and many of you may think, oh, we're too small, or we really don't have the information. We're not a target of being hacked. When, in essence, you may not be the ultimate target. You might be the stepping stone, if you will. And then, of course, there's the evasive threats as they get more and more sophisticated. So there's a lot of different things that really kind of come to play in this. Rick, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I've got a few here, as shown in the blue. You've got different type of threats. Opportunistic, you've got bots out there that are looking for weaknesses. Pen tests can show some of those things. You have some of the breaches. They point, as Jim said, they point to breakdowns in people and process. You still have people that are, if you've read some of my blogs on symmetrycorp.com, the most popular passwords are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or password. People are truly the weakest link, and so we need to bring up that awareness, even at the risk of being called, a evangelizer. We have high impact systemic threats such as heartbleed and shell shock. We see that constantly, and you probably do too, attempts at doing the shell shock and heartbleed on a regular basis. You see it on all the appliances. And of course, the endpoints themselves, employee laptops, are they bringing them home? Are they putting them on their network, et cetera, et cetera? Points of sale, scanning people, your identity scanning at your company when you have visitors. Is that hooked up to Ethernet? Is that hooked up to the internet? A lot of that stuff people don't even think about. Here at Symmetry, we purchased 2 really cool, fancy coffee machines, and they can go on Wi-Fi, and they can alert people that they're getting low on coffee. Well, the Internet of Things is bringing out a whole new game in cybersecurity.
Well, let me talk a little bit about DELL SecureWorks and kind of what we do from a security perspective. If you look at the slide up on the screen, you're going to notice in the center of the pie 4 quadrants: our managed security services, our security and risk consulting, our threat intelligence, and our incident response. And I'm going to go through a little bit later in the presentation and talk a little bit more detail about some of these. But overall, between these 4 pillars of service that DELL SecureWorks provides, it encompasses close to 190 different services that we do. And if you look at the circles around those quadrants, it's really the ultimate goal in really helping to keep our clients secure is, one, looking at it from an advisory standpoint. What are your goals as an organization from a security perspective? And we try to help, tailor what we provide, to meet those objectives. But ultimately, that one on the outside, that applied threat intelligence. Earlier, I spoke a little bit about our research team, our counter threat unit. Personally, I just refer to these as 80 of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to understanding the threat landscape. And really, that is kind of the glue that holds all of our 190 services together. It's being able to apply what's happening in the threat world in helping to keep your organization safe.
And as you know, these are just, matter of fact, these aren't really technically the latest this past week, recent breaches. And again, failure in people and processes, the world's biggest data breaches that are going on. And even, for example, who would have thought that a breach would affect children with the latest VTech breach? And a question for you, do you think that the black market will capitalize on those kids when they hit 18, if that information was in there? I don't know what information was taken. But just supposing, now you've got names and you've got young people and they have to deal with this. So, to me, that's very serious, especially when it comes to children. So there's many breaches. We hear about it constantly.
Well, and again, a lot of it is going to affect different, vertical markets. And I apologize for this slide. It is a little bit of an eye chart. And as you look, across the top, the different types of vertical markets, whether it's business services, educational, financial, governmental, et cetera, and you kind of look down that, axis on the left, it's some of the more common, exploits that are out there that are affecting these. And I think, the takeaway of this particular slide is there is no industry or there is no company that is immune to this. The former FBI chief, once, said in a cybersecurity presentation, it's not a matter of if you will be breached or attacked, it is a matter of when. And actually, in a subsequent speech that he made, he actually updated that to, it's not a matter of when you'll get breached, it's a matter of when you'll get breached again. The threat landscape is obviously very, very pervasive. And we've got to take, we understand through the registration there's a lot of manufacturing customers here, and we can kind of go through a variety of different industries. But just again, as an illustration, in this case, manufacturing. This, just the persistence and the prevalence of all the different types of malware, and of course, on the bottom side, countermeasures to stop those malware that DELL SecureWorks has put in place with our intrusion prevention services. It's a never-ending war.
And one of my comments here is one of the reasons that I came over to Symmetry. I had 14 years experience in the financial industry, and I noticed, because being in the Milwaukee area, there's a lot of manufacturers, and I've got friends that are there. And whenever I bring up the cybersecurity topic, they really didn't, through the years, weren't very aware, or they didn't really think it would matter to them. And now it's getting very sophisticated with PLCs, robotic controls, et cetera, that used to be on their own network, totally segregated, using serial or their own type of transport. Now they're hooking them up to Ethernet. That Ethernet is hooked up to the company, and again, you got all the other things that could be out there. And I've got some war stories, and manufacturers, many of them aren't under regulatory compliance to have to report a breach. For example, one friend of mine told me where at the factory someone had shut down one of the dryers and stopped it, and then the gas jets that were used to heat, they turned those on full blast, causing just a headache for them. Was that reported? Well, of course not. So manufacturing more and more, as well as other industries, needs to be aware of the cyber threat landscape.
This slide, again, for you people that have joined us in this webinar this afternoon, if there is one takeaway slide that you remember, please let this one be it. As ultimately, when we're talking about security, mitigation of risk to your environment is ultimately the goal and the objective of what we're trying to do. And when you consider risk to your organization, obviously there's a lot of different factors, there's a lot of different ways, some of which, for one organization may be more important than another. But, let's look at some of the more common things. The direct loss risk. You've had a security incident, you've had a breach. So in order to get that data back or, have an incident response team come in and do the forensics, there's a definite hard cost to that. In some of the recent studies, they say an average breach costs roughly $130 million just in direct loss to mitigate a breach. And that's really before anything else.
And then, of course, there's a risk to reputation. What kind of value to put on that? You lose market share, you lose trust. We all know business is about trust. And there's this other coin to that, and that is a positive reputation. More and more savvy executives, board of directors, private equity firms, and investors are starting to look at, well, what is their security posture? And they're asking them, you want to be a vendor with me? I remember Target, Mr. HVAC guy or lady, what do you do? What does your company do to mitigate risk if you're going to start coming into our systems? And that can apply to any vendor or any supplier or any partner.
And then, you start looking at things like, if depending on what industry that you're in, many industries obviously, have compliance issues. HIPAA in the medical space, PCI, if you take credit cards at all, Sarbanes-Oxley if you're a publicly traded firm. But there's the fine aspect of it. There's the penalties. Again, compliance does not necessarily mean secure, but secure does mean that you will be compliant. And of course, if you have a breach and it's proven that, you were deficient in your compliances, the fines and penalties can be, just, earth-shattering. And to go back one, just, the risk to the reputation. Think of it this way, especially if you're, maybe a smaller firm. You're not a Fortune, 100 type company. I'll use an example of a customer that, we're doing business with now. Small manufacturing firm, they make paint cans. Somebody has to, right? Two of the largest, and you probably know the names watching commercials on TV, that make paint is probably 80% of their revenue. If because of a breach, one of those two paint manufacturers decided to take their business elsewhere, if that happened today, in talking to their chief executive officer as well as their CFO, I literally posed the question, if that happened today, would your doors be open next Monday? And they just essentially looked at each other and said, probably not.
And then, of course, after the storm, you have the attorneys, you have litigation, you have civil damages, you have liability risk. And even to look at the exact human side, the individual, what is the reputation now of that CEO, that CFO, that board of directors who didn't really take cybersecurity seriously or put it as a lower priority? If 9 times out of 10, if they do lose their job because of a breach and it's found out they're negligent, their employability obviously goes down. So there's a level of personal risk as well as corporate. And litigation, civil damages, we all know that anybody that touches anything will more than likely be named in that lawsuit.
Let me talk a little bit more about DELL SecureWorks and the services that we provide. As I kind of outlined earlier, I mean, one of the key factors in being able to help organizations improve their security posture is being able to, first and foremost, understand what the threat landscape is. And again, we leverage our world-class counter-threat unit, which is our research team. And, some of the takeaways here from this slide is, we see, over 2 billion threat indicators that we are constantly watching. We're actively watching well over 100 threat actor groups on a daily basis to understand, what those threat actor groups are doing, how they're applying their tradecraft, where they're going from here, and, help in, keeping our customers secure.
So part of what I look at a personal level is there's a lot of folks out there that, have all kinds of certificates. And that's great. Similar to a soldier just coming out of basic training. I might have someone that just came out of basic training, which is good, or I might have a seasoned airborne ranger. When I look at SecureWorks, as well as hiring myself, I look for former experience. You've got, their top talent comes from, the Army Global NOSC, National Labs, Department of Defense, SANS instructors. So the folks that would watch these systems or that are watching the systems are seasoned. And on top of that, as I said with SC Magazine, your peers can be your worst critic. So they're highly regarded by Black Hat and DEF CON and the Department of Defense Cybercrime Conference. And as Jim can talk about, there are very impressive organizations and companies that look to SecureWorks when they do have a breach and to prevent those breaches.
Now, we look at this research team, and again, I'm going to emphasize this, over and over. The two biggest things here are mitigating risk and obviously being able to leverage that threat intelligence. So how do we get that threat intelligence? And I know there's a lot of different things on this slide, but, if you look at, first and foremost, that picture of the globe, if you will, up on the far, upper left, that is watching those 110 billion events a day from our customers. In addition to that, incident response engagements that we do. When we get a call from an organization that has had a security incident or breach, we learn a lot about what happens. And then there's the other aspects, whether it's monitoring of command and control servers that are out throughout the internet, strategic relationships with some of those organizations, that Rick just discussed, on the last slide. And of course, a lot of it is the underground communications. Our researchers, many of them are stealth. They actually play in the bad guy world to really get a better understanding of what they're doing next. So that's really the way, we try to do what we do to gather that intelligence. And from that, there is a system that was developed initially by Lockheed Martin called the kill chain. And if you look at, kind of across that, that line right in the middle, from defining the target to meeting the objective, one of the things that threat actors essentially do, now some of them may be rapid fire right next to each other, but they're going to start with reconnaissance all the way through until they meet their objective. And of course, you can stop this kill chain, if you will, at just about any area. The key is understanding your adversaries. Know what's going on, what their methodology is, to stop it earlier in the process. Because as you move to the right, it gets more difficult and more expensive. Ultimately, when things are at the already happened stage, eradicating that actor presence and removing the threat, now we're talking about an incident response type engagement. So if we can stop it before it really happens, ultimately that's the goal. And this goes into a little bit more about the kill chain in practice. I mean, what does a threat actor do? I mean, they'll look, open source intelligence. They'll look, on websites. They'll look on Facebook, they'll look on LinkedIn, whatever. You know, they'll steal records, you know, physically. I mean, they'll do their homework as far as, okay, as an organization, what is it that you do? What is of value to them? Then they'll develop a plan and kind of, you know, purchase the tools that are necessary to kind of make that happen. Then, of course, the weaponization and the delivery start. That's really kind of, all right, let's start this rolling, whether it's, you know, delivering it via a phishing email, whether it's, you know, a botnet, what have you. That's where they're going to go at it. And then the exploitation phase. And this and the installation, these are things that, because of the way the threats have been evolved and gotten more advanced, these are things that may be relatively stealth in your environment. Something gets in, it doesn't necessarily go right to number 7 and try to, you know, backdoor into that command and control server and exploit your data or whatever their objective is right away. It might sit and linger and move laterally within your organization. But when you get down to those last 4, you know, you're no longer a target. You are ultimately a victim of a security incident. Again, threat intelligence is one of the services that we provide. Not only does it really, you know, override and overview all of our different services in those 4 pillars that I talked about earlier, but even on its own, we provide a number of threat intelligence services, such as the targeted threat hunting, or, you know, that whole global threat intelligence, and we provide that type of information, you know, in a subscription format. Ultimately, the goal of what our threat intelligence service is to help you as an organization better understand what the threats are to your organization so you can be proactive and better protect your own environment. Our managed security services is probably what we're most known for. Like I said, we're, you know, well over 4,500 clients in 70+ countries with, you know, and watching this through our 5 security operations centers that are true 24/7, 365. All of our staff are highly trained security analysts. You know, this is what they do. It's not just a job to them. It is truly, you know, a passion for them. And again, you know, when you kind of look at that 110 billion events that we process on a daily basis, that gets narrowed down to about 4,100 security events where we have to call our customers, and with our SLA of 15 minutes, really trying to help our customers get to where they need to go. And here's a good graphic representation as to, you know, how we do what we do. You know, there's that 110 billion different you know, events that we're seeing on a daily basis. We're correlating that data, looking for commonalities, and kind of, you know, narrowing down the funnel, if you will. And it is, you know, again, intelligence and understanding of the threat landscape is key. And it is a mix of technology, but more importantly, it's the people and the processes behind it. So we are utilizing technology to sift and help correlate those events. But when those events really get sifted down to the point where, all right, these are things that do require humans. It requires, you know, those analysts to really take the fine-tooth comb and do the investigations as to, you know, how is this a threat? What is it? Where does this come from? And then, of course, escalating to, you know, our clients. So it really kind of narrows that down considerably. And this is kind of a nice little graphic overview as to just, you know, what that architecture looks like. You know, your environment kind of at the top, and, you know, kind of coming into our whole counter threat platform via our counter threat appliance, which is, you know, the entry point into our platform. So we're watching your applications, we're watching your servers, we're watching your firewalls and intrusion prevention, and bringing all that information into our platform to help, you know, us in sifting this down and provide the reporting and bringing that intelligence and research into the mix. And ultimately, here's like an example of, you know, a small, medium-sized organization. with a number of sites. They have about 26 firewalls and 10 distinct intrusion detection or intrusion prevention products, and a number of servers and network infrastructure that we're watching. And over the course of about a week, we see close to a little over 500 million events that are, transpiring through their network. Thankfully, most of those events are what we call our, would fall under our negative filter. That is normal, everyday, good traffic. Where the rubber really hits the road is more on the far right, those anomaly filters. We know what's bad, we know what's good. It's that handful that, this does require further investigation. So we're going to look at those, sift through all those events. In this particular example, out of 500 million events over the course of a week, there was one high incident threat that had to be escalated to a customer and just a couple of medium type of alerts.
And so to add to this, this is where Symmetry's experience comes in. For example, I had a call at about 2 in the morning, 1:45 a.m. From the DELL SecureWorks SOC, because there's many companies out there that don't have seasoned security folks or don't want to invest in it. A SOC by itself can be well over $1 million if you can find the talent. Right now, from what I've read, there's a gap of 200,000 cybersecurity professionals that are needed that are not being filled, and so it's hard for a company to recruit that kind of talent from the Department of Defense, et cetera, et cetera. So I got called versus our customer so that my team can help SecureWorks and direct SecureWorks on what to do. So SecureWorks, they see that, for example, the eye sensor saw a threat. Well, what do you do at this point? And that's a good question. If I was to ask you right now, hey, we found something in your environment, would you know what to do? What would your plan be? Do you have staff that are able to mitigate or work with SecureWorks to do that? And for most companies, that's not their main business. Their main business is making manufacturing or doing a service. It is not cybersecurity. So that's the value add that I believe Symmetry, knowing your company at a very deep level, getting to know your people, your processes, is able to help direct and manage, so to speak, SecureWorks, SOC, and other teams for you specifically.
Thank you, Rick. And again, it's that partnership between Symmetry and DELL SecureWorks that really can add value to your organization. Some of the other services that we provide, again, if you think back to the earlier slide with the 4 different quadrants, our security and risk consulting practice. We have 5 distinct practice areas that we provide. Technical testing, things like web application security assessments. Looking at your websites, looking at the code, making sure that that web interface into your organization itself is secure. The governance, risk, and compliance services, doing security assessments, looking at policies, procedures, security residency, providing organizations essentially, that security resource. Design and architecture, helping you as an organization to look at design changes, look at architecture changes from a security perspective. Understand that if you do something to X, it does affect Y and Z. And of course, there's security advisory roles where we're a resource as an organization to help you in really understanding security risks and best practices as far as being able to mitigate those. And then our incident response services and digital forensics. I mean, in a way, unfortunately, this has been a very growing part of the DELL SecureWorks business. And you'll see, it's a pretty even mix between, the engagements that we do between, large organizations and smaller organizations. Like I said earlier, it is something that crosses all vertical markets, all types of organizations, all sizes of organizations. Security, again, it's a business issue. You know, it's not an IT issue. And when you look at the engagements that we've done, about a third of them have been on the proactive side of working with their organizations as far as helping them in the development and the readiness of their incident response plan. You know, unfortunately, 70% of those engagements, you know, have been more of the, I'll call it the 911 call of help, we've been breached. And, you know, what we're able to do from there is really kind of bring a lot of value to the table as far as helping you as an organization. I mean, it wasn't long ago where if you suspected some sort of security incident or compromise, the one question that you really wanted to know was, okay, which machine was it and how do I fix it? Well, you still want the answer to that question, but ultimately you're also going to want to know, you know, if you can ascertain who the threat actors were, what were they after? Were they able to get what they were after? Obviously, how did they get in? Where else in my network could this be lingering? And then, of course, you know, how do you get them out and keep them out?
And I'd like to add something from my past as well, that think to yourself, to your team, to your company, how much experience do you have should law enforcement have to get involved? If all of a sudden now the Secret Service needs to work with you or the FBI, how experienced is your team? Do they understand the chain of custody? All those different things, which again will show that you are prepared should that happen. Have you done everything? Are you not negligent? Are you not ignoring, for lack of a better term, advice? I watch and I listen to a lot of different seminars and WebExes, for example, with law firms that specialize in litigation due to breaches. And over, there's a theme that I personally keep hearing, and one is, you know, you can't blame the victim. I've seen some of the stuff out there to a point. If I've been a victim of a breach, there's a difference in my opinion and from what I've seen between that and, yeah, we knew, everybody told us that this was a risk, but, you know, we didn't want to really invest the time or the money in preventing that. That's a whole different scenario. That's called negligence. You open up a lot more loss and other things when you do that. So the main thing is having a partner that is able to have experience with law enforcement, having experience with other investigators, have their own forensic team if needed, and that's where, again, that's why we partnered with SecureWorks.
Now, when you look at, you know, kind of, again, with incident management, we can help in providing really a whole end-to-end incident management, you know, capability to your organization. You know, if you kind of look again at, you know, the two sides of this, the proactive versus the reactive services, you know, helping you to really do those things on the left of making sure your incident response plan is current, it's up to snuff, doing a compromise assessment, looking at your organization to go, where are my holes? Where am I really vulnerable to being compromised? And of course, you know, doing things like response training and exercises. A plan is only as good as it can be if you test it once in a while. Think back to grade school. You had the fire drill. Everybody met at the flagpole. Similarly, with an incident response plan, you have to test it. Okay, if X happens, what does everybody do? Because when we're talking about security incidents, time is really of the essence. I mean, the quicker you can respond, the quicker you can eradicate, the better off you're going to be from an organization, both financially as well as just, you know, from a mitigation perspective. But if you don't have, you know, at the time of a breach is not the time to run around the office literally looking for the red binder and going, what am I supposed to do? Have those tests. And of course, we can provide a lot of this information, you know, through Symmetry with our retainer, being able to really help you with, you know, the left side of the equation. And should something happen, you know, our SLA is to be on your doorstep within 36 hours if we have to physically be on site. Remotely, we'll start working with you essentially immediately, you know, once we get notification.
Excellent. Well, I think that about wraps it up then. So thanks so much, Jim and Rick. Now we just want to offer all attendees today a free cybersecurity vulnerability assessment. Symmetry has been offering this assessment now for quite some time, and the total value of it is about $3,000. It's pretty simple. You just pick 10 of your most critical servers that touch the internet and give Symmetry the IP address. We'll then scan for vulnerabilities on each port and walk you through a custom security assessment. Symmetry then sits with you side by side to develop an incident response plan, like Jim was just mentioning, so your organization is ready in the event of a security breach. Again, like I said, we're offering this free to all attendees today, so I will open a poll right now. If you are interested, please click yes, and we'll be sure to reach out to you at the conclusion.
And Kristen, I'd like to make a little point on that too with you folks is you may already have a cybersecurity team, or you may already have a vendor, but since this is free, it never hurts to have a second set of eyes. It'd be interesting to be able to do that. And you know, I've done that for probably one of my favorite is law enforcement, where you know they've got the government looking at it and being able to show them the report. And these are very, very good people. But it's always good to take maybe, especially when it's free, a chance to take a look at what you do look like from a third-party viewpoint.
Excellent. Well, looks like most people have either answered yes or no, so I'm going to shut that poll down now. There we go. And I think, is there anything else that you wanted to cover here, Rick, about the cybersecurity assessment?
No, that's about it. But we do, you know, we will do more than that. This is a very, you know, basic. We can also partnering with SecureWorks. They can even do social engineering. Like I could call Kristen and go, "Hi, this is Rick from the help desk. I need your username and password right away." And your answer, Kristen, would be
no.
Yeah. I was waiting. So, and again, you'll be amazed at how many people don't even check to see if that's really their help desk. That will easily give that. So everything from basic pen test to deep social engineering test, depending on what you need for your company, partnering with SecureWorks, we're able to do that.
Excellent. Well, now I know we're kind of coming up at the top of the hour here shortly, so there were some questions that came in, so I was hoping Jim and Rick, you have some time to hopefully address these.
Absolutely.
Perfect. The first question is, what's the task of digital forensics? Can you tell a little bit more about the story?
Well, with digital forensics, I mean, we've all seen the TV shows like CSI Miami and whatnot, those types of things, and it's solving the crime, if you will, but from a digital perspective. When there's a security incident, again, how do you ascertain who the threat actors were and what they were after? It's the digital forensics of being able to essentially piece together what was it that got into your environment. Was it an embedded malware that was, say, put into a PDF file that a user opened, that from that one workstation started going laterally through that organization's network, looking for more and higher credentials from their Active Directory server, as an example, and then ultimately getting into a database server that, excuse me, may have customer information or proprietary information, and then being able to take that data and secretly send it outside the organization to a command and control server in the internet somewhere. So it's really being able, that digital forensics aspect is, it's the solving of the crime, if you will.
And then to give you the business side of it, as I've through my career worked with C-levels and with many, many different levels after a breach, as I was part of a team that mitigated many, one thing that stood out was the board of directors or the C-level folks or your investors. All right, you had a breach, we accept it, well, not fully accept it, but we understand who did it. And I can't tell you how many people, because they didn't have proper policies, procedures, or equipment in, said we have no idea who did it. If you've ever been a a victim of a personal theft, a burglary, and you have no clue, that's an uncomfortable feeling to know that it could happen again. So it's very important to have that forensics. And then that's just for standard. If you're talking a regulatory situation where, again, heavy law enforcement gets involved, they've got their forensics teams, but even they're going to be limited if you don't have the right equipment in and or personnel to be able to teamwork with them to find the bad actors and then prevent the bad actors from doing it again.
Hopefully that answered your question.
Sounds good, yeah. So if anybody has any other questions, please type them into the Q&A sidebar now, but we'll move on to the next question. How do you define what malware is?
Malware, so that comes from malicious software, in my opinion. Right?
That's technically what it is.
So what is malicious? Usually it's not somebody that's nice. So it's malicious. It wants to hurt you, take advantage of you, victimize you. So that's malware. For me, it's everything. It's viruses, it's Trojans, it's all those other detailed technical piece of malicious code.
Alrighty, that sounds good. We have another question that just came in here. What cybersecurity threats concern you the most?
Wow, there's a few of them.
All of them.
Yeah. You know, and Jim's right, they all are. But for me, having had the honor and privilege to, serve people in a more of a public service aspect, for me, it's number one for me is children, and then two is life. Unfortunately, we're seeing very sophisticated threat actors, not only in cyberspace, but in physical space. And for them to be very good at the physical space, they need to get that intelligence information from the cyberspace. So humans, obviously, number one. Number two is financial risk. If you can destabilize the world by causing people to not trust financial sector, then you're really having some issues. And then, of course, healthcare. Anything to do with healthcare, pharmaceuticals, things of that nature. Imagine somebody that wants to create a situation where people get sick, or their hospital equipment doesn't function the way it should be. So it's all, but in my opinion, when it gets down to human life and quality of life, those really stand out to me.
And to piggyback on what Rick said, from a risk mitigation perspective, the perimeter of your organization is always going to be king. I mean, yes, you have the insider threats. I mean, you have the bad employee, the thief, what have you. That's inevitable in just about, any type of organization. But when we talk about cyber threats, primarily it's from the outside looking in. So put the fence around your yard and guard the fence. I mean, you really need to look at the perimeter. And from that, as you look at the way the threat landscape itself is just changing and morphing, aside from the perimeter, what's your next weakest link? It's the humans, the people that are working on the laptops, on the workstations. I'll use the example again, with the PDF of, especially now during the holidays. Click here for your tracking information. Think about this. If you know you didn't order anything and you know you didn't ship anything, what is there to track? But there is an individual in your organization that probably in the last 20 minutes just clicked on that PDF.
And I'd like to bring another point out is it's your culture. You don't want to have, Chicken Little, the world's coming to an end attitude. But it's very important for the culture, for the board of directors, the chairman of the board, the C-level folks, to support cybersecurity and to actually adhere to it and be an example themselves. I'm going to call him out, but Symmetry CEO, every time I make we have a training thing, or anytime we have a new type of policy for security, he's the first one on board to do exactly what we ask. He's never too busy, and he never has an attitude of it doesn't apply to me. So that's the other piece that can really help your organization, is to get everybody on board, everybody, to understand the seriousness of cyber threats out there.
Excellent, yes. The next question here that just came in is, are there any other open source threat intel databases that you would suggest besides Citrus?
You know, I guess that's one of the reasons that I've leveraged the partnership with SecureWorks and other things. I'm trying to pick my words here. There's things that people know about, and obviously you have intelligence within other organizations that, you know, work with companies like SecureWorks to make sure they're at the very top of that. So there are other ones out there. I have a hard time recommending one or another.
And I'm not going to really name any specific names, but I think, you know, as we're talking to the, you know, the whole audience here at the webinar, depending on what type of organization you are, right. You know, there may be informational feeds that are available to you, you know, based on the type of organization, you know, correct, that you are. You know, there's banking things that go to banks. There's other things that go
government,
to
healthcare.
Government and to healthcare. So there's a lot of information, and obviously in, you know, with what we do at DELL SecureWorks, we obviously are parts of those information feeds in most cases. You know, there's a lot of information sharing between that. You know, that being said, you know, the more information that you have and the more current and even ahead of the curve information that's available to you, the better off you're going to be as far as trying to protect your environment.
And I would be cautious to make sure that whatever you're using is reputable, because if I'm a really smart, intelligent bad guy, I'm going to put something out that is going to feed you legitimate stuff, but also possibly expose you.
All right. So I think that about wraps it up for the Q&A portion. I haven't gotten any other questions coming in, so we can probably just wrap up the webinar at this point. Again, thank you so much, Rick and Jim. It was a really great presentation. For those of you that did acknowledge that you would like to get followed up on regarding the free security assessment, we will do that after the webinar. The recording will be available, so we'll get that posted to the website shortly. I know some people were asking about that. In addition, I wanted to note, you know, Rick, being our cybersecurity SME, has a tip of the month out there on our Symmetry blog. So please, you know, take a peek at that, you know, weekly and monthly, and check out his new tip every month. And again, we just want to say thank you for everyone for taking the time out of their busy schedules. And if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself, Rick, Jim. Visit the Symmetry website, and we will hopefully work with you soon. Thanks again, and have a great day.